What if I told you a sitting African president received a death threat, not from terrorists, not from rebels, but from the Prime Minister of Israel? What if I told you that at 3:17 a.m., the leader of a sovereign African nation was given 48 hours to surrender his power or be removed? No court, no coup, just a phone call from Tel Aviv. Captain Traoré, Netanyahu said, "Restore our mining deals, reinstate our surveillance systems, or step down, or we'll take you down." This wasn't foreign policy. It was political blackmail, backed by global power. But here's the part they never expected. Ibrahim Traoré didn't run. He didn't beg. He stared down the barrel of the threat and said, "Try me." And that single act of defiance would ignite the largest political awakening in modern African history. In the next 48 hours, Burkina Faso didn't fall. It rose. And with it, rose a question no superpower wanted to hear echoed across the continent. Who really rules Africa? Its people, or foreign contracts signed in smoke-filled rooms? This video isn't about politics. It's about sovereignty. It's about what happens when one man refuses to kneel and ends up giving an entire continent permission to stand. But let me ask you this. If your president received a ultimatum from a foreign power, would your country obey or resist? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you think more people need to hear what really happened that night, hit that subscribe button, because once you hear what came next, you'll never look at global power the same way again. Israel's ultimatum, the uprising that set all of Africa on fire. Have you ever wondered what happens behind closed doors when a superpower threatens a president in the dead of night? Not a movie, not fiction. This is what actually unfolded in Burkina Faso, hour by hour, as the clock on Netanyahu's ultimatum began to tick. It started with silence, the kind of silence that only comes before storms. In the early morning hours, Traoré's crisis team was already in motion. No coffee, no small talk, just a single recording playing through the speakers. Netanyahu's voice, cold, calculated, casual. Restore our contracts, reinstate our surveillance, or surrender power, voluntarily or not. The room fell still. Then Traoré spoke. "I want this played on loop in every African Leadership Academy. This is how foreign powers speak when they believe they own us." But this time, the script was about to change. Hour 2. Orders went out. Not to the west, but to Caracas, Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing. Not begging for rescue, but building an alliance of resistance. Hour 5. Burkina Faso's cybersecurity grid detected its first wave of silent strikes. Bank systems glitched. Power grids blinked. The defense minister leaned in. "This is the soft war. They want collapse without firing a shot." Traoré didn't blink. "Then we give them silence, not chaos." Hour 8. The information war began. Deepfakes of Traoré boarding a private plane. Leaked documents showing Swiss accounts, tweets, headlines, blog posts, all saying the same lie. The president has fled. The resistance is over. But something strange happened. The people didn't panic. They got angry. Radio stations went rogue, calling out the lies live on air. Street artists painted over propaganda with murals of Traoré standing tall. And across Ouagadougou, homemade signs appeared on balconies, markets, lampposts. "We don't run. We don't sell out. We don't answer to Tel Aviv." Hour 12. The streets filled, not in fear, but fury. Young people, old veterans, mothers with babies on their backs. Not one came to beg the president to give in. They came to tell him, "Hold the line." Hour 18. Something no foreign analyst had predicted. Burkina Faso, small, landlocked, outgunned, had just become the epicenter of a continental reckoning, because the question wasn't just about Traoré anymore. It was about every African leader who had ever been told to sit down, sign the deal, smile for the cameras, or else. The ultimatum was supposed to crush him. Instead, it became fuel. Fuel for something bigger than any intelligence agency, satellite strike, or disinformation campaign could stop. By hour 24, halfway to the deadline, one truth had become undeniable. This wasn't about mining rights. This was about who gets to write Africa's future. A president's defiance had become a people's revolution. But now, let me ask you, if a foreign power gave your president 48 hours to surrender, would your people hit the streets or hit the snooze button? Tell me in the comments. Would your country fight for its dignity or wait for someone else to do it? The ultimatum escalates. When cyber attacks and lies strike a nation, what if your government was under siege, but no one fired a single bullet, no tanks, no jets, just silence, and then collapse? That's exactly what Burkina Faso faced as the second half of Israel's 48-hour ultimatum kicked in. It started at hour 30, a final phone call, Netanyahu's voice again, but this time lower, darker. Captain Traoré, you have 18 hours left. Use them wisely. Pride won't protect your people from what's coming. Then, silence. But the storm had already begun. Hour 31. The national banking system went dark. Hour 32. The electrical grid began to flicker across key military bases. Hour 33. Communications blacked out in 2 provinces. Inside the presidential crisis room, alarms lit up. The intelligence chief rushed in. "Sir, we're under full-spectrum cyber assault. This is the playbook. Crash the economy, paralyze communication, flood the airwaves. But they're not just attacking infrastructure anymore." He paused, then placed a laptop on the table. On screen, a fake video showing Traoré boarding a jet. Another showing military officials demanding his resignation. Fake bank statements, leaked voice notes, a coordinated narrative. Burkina Faso's president has fled the country. The resistance has collapsed. It was brutal, psychological warfare designed to fracture a nation in real time. The goal? Make the people believe their leader was already gone. But this time, the people fought back. By hour 34, counter videos were already spreading. Clips of Traoré in real-time meetings, walking the palace halls, rallying with ministers. When fake headlines claimed he'd siphoned millions to Switzerland, local journalists posted uncut videos of his personal staff working through the night. One journalist said live on air, "If Traoré fled, why are the lights still on in the palace? Why are our ministers still here? This is not a collapse. This is a siege, and we will not surrender to lies." Meanwhile, in the streets, the mood was shifting again, not from panic to calm, but from anger to action. Hacktivists across Africa joined in. Independent cyber units traced IP addresses. They exposed server locations in Tel Aviv and Brussels. Within hours, Africa under attack trended across social media in 20 countries. But something even more powerful was happening offline. Hour 36. Spontaneous protests erupted in Bamako, Niamey, Accra, Lagos. People held signs not just supporting Traoré, but rejecting the system behind the attacks. You attack one of us, you face all of us. Africa won't be programmed. Digital warfare is still warfare. Then came the tipping point. Hour 40. The African Union held an emergency session. Speaker after speaker took the mic, not to de-escalate, but to draw lines. "This is not about Burkina Faso anymore," said Ghana's delegate. This is a test of whether African leadership is real or just tolerated by foreign powers. By hour 42, Israel's plan was clear. Use digital siege and narrative collapse to force Traoré out without ever sending a single soldier. But that clarity came too late, because now millions had seen through the playbook. They saw the fake videos, they saw the pressure, and more importantly, they saw who was standing tall in the middle of it. But let me ask you this: if foreign powers flooded your country with lies, propaganda, fake videos, and cyber attacks, would you know what to believe? Or would your nation fall without a single shot fired? Let us know in the comments. The fallout: how one ultimatum reshaped an entire continent. By hour 45, the impact had spread far beyond Ouagadougou. The streets of Burkina Faso were packed shoulder to shoulder, but this wasn't a protest. It was something more primal. It was an uprising of dignity. From teenagers with cardboard signs to grandmothers with cracked voices, they all had the same message: our president stays. Our country stays ours. But the most unexpected shockwave wasn't in Burkina Faso. It was in the reactions of other African governments. In Bamako, Mali's president held an emergency broadcast: if they can remove him today, they can remove me tomorrow. In Accra, Ghana's parliament passed a unanimous resolution: any attempt to destabilize Burkina Faso is an attack on African democracy itself. In Niamey, Niger students held up a banner that read, "One leader threatened, a continent awakened." Even leaders who had long stayed silent on foreign interference were now forced to speak. Why? Because for the first time, someone hadn't just resisted pressure, he had exposed it. The calls Traoré recorded, the cyber attacks, the media smears, all of it now lived on airwaves, social media, embassy cables, and the message was loud and clear. Foreign powers were still trying to control African governments, but this time they got caught. And worse, for them, this time the target hit back. That blowback caused cracks in global alliances. At the United Nations, emergency meetings began to fracture. Some Western diplomats pushed for de-escalation. Others backed Israel silently, hoping the media storm would pass. But it didn't, because by then, the people had seized the narrative. In South Africa, protesters chanted, "Not just Traoré, not just Burkina Faso, this is all of us." In Nairobi, civil society groups demanded full audits of contracts signed under foreign pressure. In Dakar, opposition parties called for Traoré-style transparency in every government meeting with Western powers. The entire continent was now grappling with a dangerous question: how much of our sovereignty have we already sold? But while elites scrambled to reposition, something even more powerful was happening at ground level: a psychological shift. African citizens, for decades told to vote, obey, accept, were now asking, why do foreign leaders think they can fire our presidents? Who gave them that right? And what if we never agreed to their terms in the first place? Burkina Faso, once a small landlocked country known mostly for struggle, had just triggered a continent-wide reckoning. And here's the real fallout: Traoré's refusal didn't just defend his office. It destabilized the very foundation of foreign control across Africa. So now, we have a question for you. If your government revealed tomorrow that half your nation's decisions were shaped by outside threats, would you demand change? Or would you stay silent and call it diplomacy? Comment below, because this conversation is no longer theoretical. Washington's dilemma: when the puppet cut the strings. At first, Washington stayed silent. No press release. No comment from the State Department. No briefing at the White House. Just the usual "we are monitoring the situation" statement. Because deep down, They weren't sure what to say. Burkina Faso wasn't supposed to be a battleground. It was supposed to be a pawn, a reliable one, a country small enough to control, poor enough to pressure, and isolated enough to silence. But Traoré had broken the script, and, in doing so, he had triggered a crisis of strategy in every Western capital. In Tel Aviv, Israel's foreign ministry scrambled. The leaked recordings had exposed Netanyahu, not just as a businessman, but as a bully. Worse, they had destroyed decades of quiet influence operations in Africa. Suddenly, every leader who had once signed deals under pressure was asking whether those deals could still hold. In Paris, the fallout was immediate. The French press ran headlines, "Israel's ultimatum backfires." Think tanks warned of a strategic awakening in Francophone Africa. But it was Washington that faced the deepest dilemma. The United States had long relied on a dual strategy: talk democracy, practice control, support elections publicly, while backing cooperative leaders behind the scenes. But Traoré had shattered that illusion. His resistance was televised, documented, viral, and, worst of all, popular. Every time the White House delayed a statement, the world noticed. When they finally spoke, it was with careful language. "We urge all sides to seek diplomatic solutions." But Africans weren't fooled, because there weren't two sides. There was one elected leader and one foreign threat. The Global South, however, saw it clearly. In Caracas, Maduro said, "If Israel can issue ultimatums to African presidents, it can do the same in Latin America." In New Delhi, Indian analysts called it the most important democratic pushback since the Bandung Conference. In Beijing, state media framed the crisis as proof of Western hypocrisy. Talk of sovereignty collapses when their interests are threatened. For Washington, it was a no-win scenario. Support Israel and look complicit. Support Traoré and break from their closest Middle Eastern ally. So they did what empires do when unsure: they stalled. But in the delay, something dangerous happened. Africa stopped waiting. African leaders stopped seeking approval. African citizens stopped fearing consequences. African youth started building new alliances. The State Department eventually released a statement praising regional stability. But by then, the world had moved on. Traoré was still in power. The continent was more united. And the West? Still pretending the puppet hadn't cut the strings. So here's a question worth asking. When the people you once controlled stop listening, do you adjust your strategy or double down on a system already collapsing? Let us know your thoughts below. After the ultimatum, a new era, or a silent retaliation? When the clock struck the 48th hour, what the world had been waiting for never happened. There was no coup, no midnight flight into exile, no collapse of a fragile government. Only a president stepping onto his balcony, raising his fist to the thunderous roar of hundreds of thousands below. He hadn't stepped down, and the world didn't know what to do next. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new path, one filled with both opportunity and danger. Politically, Burkina Faso had just reclaimed something most nations had quietly surrendered: real sovereignty. No more backdoor deals. No more security cooperation in exchange for minerals. No more negotiating from a position of weakness. But resistance comes with a price. Aid may be cut. Development loans may stall. Western media campaigns are already painting a familiar picture: a dangerous regime slipping into authoritarianism. Soon, they'll try to isolate Traoré, drain his resources, fuel discontent from within, because they can't afford to let him become a precedent. But Traoré is no longer fighting alone. What he built in 48 hours wasn't just political survival. It was a collective belief that Africa can choose its own destiny, and that belief is spreading. In parliamentary debates, in political science classrooms, across social media, where 48 hours has become a rallying cry. Now, the world will watch to see whether Burkina Faso can sustain this defiance, or whether economic, media, and intelligence pressure will slowly grind it down. This question isn't just for Traoré, it's for every African leader watching from the sidelines. And it's for you, the one watching this video right now. What do you think? Can a small nation like Burkina Faso change global rules with nothing but willpower and conviction? Or, in the end, does the world still belong to those who issue ultimatums? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in a sovereign Africa, subscribe for more stories they don't want you to hear. 48 hours was all it took to awaken a generation. In the end, this is no longer just a story about a phone call between Netanyahu and Traoré. It's no longer a standoff between a small nation and a regional power. It's no longer a short-lived political crisis. This is a historical pivot, the 0 hour of a new era. Traoré didn't just survive the ultimatum, he turned it into fuel, turned threats into foundation, turned isolation into a rallying cry. And that's what truly terrifies the world, because if one African president can say no and remain in power, then those who have long issued ultimatums must confront what they've always avoided, the end of unchecked power. From now on, every threat will be scrutinized. Every backroom deal will be dragged into the light. Every compliant leader will have to answer to their people. The question is no longer, can Burkina Faso endure? It's, who's next? Next to say no. Next to reject contracts that sell out national dignity. Next to believe that democracy isn't paperwork, it's the people's trust. We are living in a moment where history is being rewritten hour by hour, and you are part of it. So ask yourself, if 48 hours could shake the global order, what will you do with your next 48 minutes? Stay silent or spread the truth. Leave a comment. Share this video with someone who's never heard this side of the story. And if you believe sovereignty should never be up for sale, subscribe to the channel because this is just the beginning.